Hello everyone, this is Women's Grandmaster Sabina Foyshore. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. It has been a while since I posted a game in my series, my most memorable wins and losses, and so I've decided to go ahead and show you my most memorable win against the first Grandmaster that I ended up beating. That win happened in Cappelle la Grande in France in 2006. I was 22-11, and I was playing Grandmaster Jean-Luc Chabanon, famous French Grandmaster who was 200 rating points higher than me at that point. This is a very important game for me because, well, not only I beat the first Grandmaster, that always stays with you as a great memory, but also somehow it's interesting. We ended up playing the exact same line against the Benko, which is, surprisingly or not, the way that I beat my first women's Grandmaster. So anyways, he actually surprised me with this opening. This was not part of his repertoire at the time. And so I thought, well, okay, that's fine. I'm going to try to play what I already know and try to avoid making weaknesses. When you're playing stronger players, you really don't want to create weaknesses for yourself because they're already stronger than you. If they have that edge, they most likely are going to be able to have like a huge advantage. So you want to try to keep a good balance in the position. Of course, I'm going for the pawn, but after knight c3, d6, I decided to go for the same line as I played against Yelena Sedina, which, by the way, I'm linking in the description below as well as up here. I went for g3. So of course, e4 is a very typical line and very much played these days also, but I really, at that time, I really didn't want to play with my king in the center, though I do know that there are ideas for white to follow up maybe with g3, king g2 and such, and then start pushing the pawns in the center. But in those times, like I said, I just wanted to be quiet and just get a good position. g3. g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, development, knight bd7. So far, everything is natural. As you might notice, black has played knight d7 before castling. So what is happening now is that this knight wants to go to b6, put pressure in d5, and in the same time take control over the c4 square. And if you're not ready to play b3 in time, well, that might not be so good for you. So it is very important, if you choose to play this line with white, after knight b to d7, to go for rook b1 in order to meet knight b6 with b3, restricting the knight and in the same time avoiding anything on the long diagonal. So my opponent didn't go for knight b6. He went for castle. Of course, knight b6 is an option, and like I said, b3 is going to happen, bishop c8, and here there are a lot of things to consider for white, so I will let you do your research if this is a line you want to choose to play yourself. Castle, castle, queen a5. Okay, so black is trying, they are sacrificing a pawn with the purpose of putting some pressure over a2 and b2. They have both files open, they have the diagonal opened as well, so they try to put as much pressure as possible to make it very uncomfortable for white to finish their development. But not to worry, of course, I cannot play b3, so I need to go bishop d2 first. It is of course not ideal to place the bishop in d2 because you're bothering your queen, and this is not exactly, when you have more space, this is not exactly the square where you want to place the bishop, but temporary, it's really the right location. So bishop d2, rook f to b8, and now I played queen c2. So we're on move 13, and I've just finished my development. I've linked my two rooks. For some of you youngsters who are watching this video, this is basically a goal that you must have. By move 12, 13, you really should have the link between your two rooks. Otherwise, you're probably doing something wrong. You have all the pieces you have to take care of, and this is exactly what I'm doing here. Now, this is still part of the opening, so I'm not trying to say I did something amazing, but it's something that opening principles require you to do, so I highly recommend you to follow. Now, my opponent went for knight b6, and of course, as I pointed to you before, I always was ready to meet knight b6 with b3 as soon as I played rook to b1. Now, in this position, my opponent played queen a3. Black has to be very careful not to lose any material due to this discovery, and of course, they cannot take in d5, specifically because knight takes, and then Black will be losing material. So he's trying to escape the pin by playing queen a3. Instead, maybe knight e8 would have been slightly better idea for Black, with the idea knight c7, putting some pressure, eventually maybe playing some c4. Those are some typical ideas for Black. But my opponent played queen a3, and I met that with bishop c1, queen back, and of course if I wanted to make a draw I could repeat, but I wasn't so sure that my opponent would take that repetition. If I remember correctly, he used to enter time trouble a lot, so this could have been a great moment where he could win some, you know, like basically make 2 moves and have 2 moves less later when getting closer to the tight knot time pressure. And I have to remind you that I believe this tournament was not played with increment at that time. It was 2 hours to make 40 moves and then 1 hour to finish the game, if I'm not mistaken. So I went for rook d1. It is very important for white to protect the d5 pawn, and of course I want to play e4, but while I'm still pinned here, that's not an option, so I have to protect my pawn first. My opponent followed with knight e8, bishop d2 once again, and now he went for knight d7. Now, of course, in this position, queen a3 is a possibility, but the whole idea is that now the queen in a3 is pretty much trapped, so white can go on with their plan of playing e4, try to get a little bit more space on the king side, and eventually that queen will be chased away from there. Instead of that, c4 would have been an interesting alternative, but I believe here white shouldn't be too worried. This is an interesting idea, b4, and now after queen a3, I believe Fischer came up with this kind of idea where they would take their rook, he would take his rook out and then place the bishop in e1. It doesn't look such a beautifully placed piece, but it really keeps the position together and keeps all the pieces pretty well coordinated, and of course keeps the knight in c3 protected, while white has also created 2 connected pass pawns. All we have to do is get this queen away from a3, and white's pawns should be rolling. But my opponent played knight to d7 here. And what to do? I played h3. Now this is maybe not the best move in the position. Some typical ways for white to improve here are by playing a4. But I remember my opponent was getting very low on time at this point. So I decided it was the right moment to try to simply make moves that keep improving my position without creating too many weaknesses. And I thought h3 is one of those moves. Because I'm controlling the g4 square for some potential knight getting there at some point. I can bring my king to h2 to avoid any kind of, you know, things on the diagonal if I choose to eventually push e4 and f4. So I thought this was a really kind of prophylactic move. Knight c7. Finally, I went for a4. So this is a typical idea. We're leaving this b3 pawn behind, but in the same time, any c4s, or oftentimes c4s, would be met with some b4. In this specific case, in case of c4, we can just still play b4, yeah, b4, b5, or something like that. And if you take knight a2, and black will be losing some material. So queen b6 was my opponent's choice here. Like I said, I continued my improvement. Now, rook a7. Maybe not the best choice. c4 is really something that black wants to do, and I think when my king going to h2, it's very attractive to make such a move because you see the f2 pawn and you're telling yourself, ooh, now it's the right moment. But really, that doesn't quite work because after b4, queen takes f2, I can play in this position, rook f1, chasing the queen back away, and then white has ideas with queen c1 or queen e4, one of those moves, trying to go for e7. These pawns will be rolling, and the fact that black helped white open up the f-file, ooh, that could be definitely in white's favor. So after rook a7, I went for e4. This was definitely a move I was going to play eventually to push my pawns, get a little bit more space in the center. Doubling up on the b-file, but they don't really have threats. That's the big problem. Ideally, it would be amazing if black could trade these two pieces. So if the queen could go to b8 and this rook in b6, then black would have some annoying threats on the b3 pawn. But the way they are placed, unfortunately, it doesn't quite help them. So I went on to play bishop e3. The idea is, of course, to prepare some b4 and b5 later as well. And my opponent made a mistake that proved to be devastating. He gave up his amazing bishop in g7. Bishop takes c3. Now, sometimes this idea is typical, but here I found it not to be so good. Instead, maybe black could admit that, tripling in this fashion wasn't such a great idea and could try to just bring the queen back and switch and try to get the queen behind the rooks. But he went for bishop takes c3. Queen takes c3, queen b4. Now, typically trades should be good for white because white has an extra pawn. But I thought in this position, due to the fact that I had so much extra space compared to black, I thought it is much better and much wiser to keep the queens on the board. Considering the c4, which, like I keep telling you guys, is a very typical idea for black, I thought this does not work because possibly knight e4, and we have ideas with knight c6, f4, simply, just menacing and an amazing idea in position for white, and there isn't so much that black can do, and so my opponent played queen a3. Well, of course I couldn't stand that queen over there, so I chased it away for once, and here bishop d2. I was quite looking forward to queen a3 in this position so that I could go maybe bishop a5 and try to trap the queen in my territory, but my opponent didn't go for it. He went for queen b6. And I think that could have been maybe one of their only choices. Bishop c3, f6, and now, right? f6, kind of necessary, at least it feels that way. But you should be very, very careful when you're pushing your pawns. Knight e8 probably would have made a little bit more sense. Just wait a little bit longer before you weaken your position more, especially because you don't really have a bishop there to defend you. I have to point out that my opponent was in pretty big trouble at this point, so it is natural to try to keep your position well defended and avoid allowing your opponent's attack. So he went for f6. But now, when we see all of those pawns, think about it. White has more space, has an extra pawn, and they have the pair of bishops. It is only natural to try to find a way to improve their position. And it's important to try to find a way to attack. So I was pretty happy with the move I chose, h4. Knight e8 at last, now bishop h3. Because h4 wasn't necessarily played just to play h5, but also to try to infiltrate on the light squares which have been weakened after f6, and with the bishop in a6, black is going to have some trouble defending their king. Knight g7, and now I was a little bit, I became a little bit too excited, or I was kind of nervous to having had such a good position against the Grandmaster at the time. I was, 17 years old, I think. So I decided, let's go for queen d2, try to bring my queen for the attack. But maybe in this position, I could have gone for some other ideas. Maybe knight e1 could have been one to try to start pushing pawns. This was something that I actually pointed out in my analysis myself, to try to force black to give up this d4 square so that the knight could come on an even better square, either c6 or e6. There are a lot of options for white here to maintain the advantage, but my move wasn't probably the best. Queen to d8, and now I played bishop a5. So that, you know, that this move is more like, you know, a kid's type of move. You see a queen, you see a piece that's not doing so well, you want to attack it, but really b4 is a very interesting idea that maybe I should have considered. Even if now they capture, maybe I can take with the rook, and then of course, like I said, I get this d4 square. Would have been an interesting position, but I went bishop a5, and now queen to c2, just making sure everything is well protected. And now my opponent, due to the uncertainty of the position, not knowing exactly what to do, black's plans on the queen side have kind of been stopped. I mean, b3 is well protected, and their knights are not doing so much. They have to stay to defend. This bishop in a6 doesn't do so much either. So he was trying to create some counterplay by opening up the position on the king side. But that didn't really lead to very much. Of course, I captured, knight takes, and bishop c3. Knight f6, and now we see an outpost. When you see an outpost and you have a knight on the board, look for the fastest way to get your knight over there. So that's what I did, knight g5. It's kind of interesting that I made a note for myself here that I should have gone for bishop takes f5, g takes f5, queen takes f5 first, and then knight g5 to continue the attack. But I guess I didn't really consider this position as much. After rook takes b3, I thought I should go knight g5, and now I thought that, you know, I would certainly have the winning position, but knight g5, I didn't miss anything. This is a great idea. The knight comes to e6, and positionally, white is just, you know, doing amazing. Once again, bishop takes f5. This time was probably much, much better. Unfortunately, I went for bishop a5 first. I believe I got at this point in time trouble as well. Rook b7, knight e6. And now I went for the material. Of course, I'm a kid. Well, at that time I was like, come on, material, for sure, everything will be fine. Don't do that. Try to understand what's the best move in the position. And if you think you found a good move, try to find a better one. I believe there was Tal, Grandmaster and former world champion Tal, who was saying that. I might be wrong. Rook takes d8, bishop takes d8, and now after knight takes d5, suddenly it is not so clear for me anymore how much better I am, because black suddenly has created some counterplay with those chains of pawns. But I was able to come back here, knight b4, queen c3, and here my opponent played e5. Giving up the other exchange, which of course I took, bishop takes, and now I went for the queen trade. Now, of course, I have two exchanges up, but the problem is there are no open files. I'm going to be struggling for my rooks to get into play. But if black chooses to trade here, then of course it's not going to be so difficult for me, because I can play some g4. Of course, I have pressure on this d6 pawn. If the knight goes to d4, then the bishop will attack the pawn through e7 or c7. It will fall, and once that pawn falls, everything falls from black's position. So of course black didn't go for the queen trade, but chose to retreat the knight. And now I couldn't stand the potential attack. I mean, suddenly black's pieces seem menacing here. The bishop can be opening, the knight comes to f3, queen can come to f3 as well, f2 could become a weakness, and I couldn't stand it. So I've decided to get rid of one of those knights. And I think it was a wise decision. And now I'm going with my pawn to promotion. In this position, however, I've made a very bad mistake that could have costed me, you know, half a point. I played a6. Instead of this, I should have just gone either bishop b6 or maybe trade the queens here, king takes, and then go for b4. I really need to keep my pawns connected in order to go for the win. But instead, I chose to push my pawn immediately, which could have allowed some drawing ideas for my opponent. In this position, he didn't take the chance. This was probably one of the last chances that I gave him. And he traded, and after pawn takes, he went for the pawn. But that was something that I had planned and I was really looking forward to. Instead of this, my opponent could have gone for bishop d5. This would have been something a little bit annoying, because now where do I move my queen? If I go queen to d3, he can go bishop e4 maybe. And then, you know, queen f1, queen f3. This becomes very unpleasant. Computer might disagree, but for humans having to play this, and low on time as well, this is not a very pleasant position to allow. You don't want to make your pieces passive. So, thankfully for me, my opponent took in c4. I recaptured, and here I was really happy with bishop c7. Now, last thing that black could have done, but the position is still pretty bad, is to bring the king towards the center. It's an endgame. We have to try to use all of our pieces to support our passed pawns, our other pieces. But he went for d3. After bishop takes d6, knight e4, bishop b4, completely stopping their pawn. My pawn here in f2 is still well protected. Now f3, I'm just pushing my opponent back. And now it's time to try to find a way to trade some pawns, and specifically try to get rid of this passed pawn, which is a little bit annoying. But it didn't take me too long, because now after knight takes, pawn takes, king f7, I immediately brought my king, as you can see. And from here on, it was just a matter of technique to win the game. Now, it's not easy for black to hold on to the pawn anymore, because I can just play rook to b4, and after bishop a6, for example, to keep the pawn, we can just, maybe we can just go rook a4, for example, and the pawn will fall next. And like I said, from here on, it was just a matter of technique. I have an exchange up, and all I have to do is just get my king more active and push black's king back. So I used a few checks and shouldering in order to make that happen. Eventually, black was put in Zugzwang and had to go back, and now I brought my king in. And in this position, my opponent resigned. Because, for example, in view of, say, bishop d3, white can check, right? King f6. And then the easiest way for white to win could be just come, grab the pawn, grab the other pawn as well, and then the game is over. So this was it. My win, my first win against the Grandmaster, at least. The one that I remember, the one that was a real official classical game. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and enjoyed the game, and you had things to learn, both from the opening standpoint, but also from a psychological point of view, and also what to do when you're winning. Try to hold your pace, don't go for material, try to find the best move in the position, and so on. I really appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much for subscribing if you enjoy my videos, and thank you for giving me a thumbs up for whichever video that you like, so that I know to make more of those videos. Any comments and feedback is also highly appreciated. As always, please stay safe, and I'll see you in my next video. Thank you.